Okay, I've chosen an R33 because it's a bit of a staple import in a lot of markets. As you can see, the first thing is that the vehicle is parked in, so a test drive is not possible. This is, I guess, the biggest downside to buying vehicles from auction, and of course, you can't put it on an auction and you can't do complex work on it. But as you'll see, that there's still a fair amount of information that you can glean from a car by looking at it and doing a few tests. Usually the first thing that one will do is, of course, have a quick look at the auction sheet. They're not 100% reliable, but they can be handy. So having a look at this sheet, I'm sure you can't see that on the tape. It's a grade 4B, so it should be fairly reasonable. Body looks a little bit rough from this, but we'll see what it's like in person. Mentions here wear to the seat, wear to the steering wheel. Wheels have some scratches, door mirrors have some scratches. So all pretty standard fare, so they haven't noticed anything that's very bad. So first thing we'll do, I guess, is start it up and see how that goes. I hope that's not going to be noisy. Alright, first thing in fact that I can hear is a bit of noise from the timing belt, which is not an uncommon issue with the RB engines. Basically the tensioner tends to go on these, and as the tensioner gets a little bit loose, the belt rubs. The belt rubs on the timing cover. In fact, that's about as bad as it gets. So basically that would need the timing belt to be replaced. So I haven't picked the greatest example, but other things that one would normally check is radiator fluid. If it's all rusty, that tells you something, or if in this case it's pretty dry or empty. Geez, I've really chosen a good one today. Well, this is turning out to be a great example, but usually one of course looks for bubbles and milkiness, indicating a head gasket problem. You can check for low compression. It's not a great scientific check, but if the revs drop when you open up the oil cap, then that can suggest that it can have low compression. That's not a definite. I mean, different engines react in different ways. I mean, for example, the Evos, because they have forged pistons, it takes them a long time for the pistons to expand. So those you'll often, unless the engine's been running for quite a while, when you open the oil cap, the revs will always drop. Also, it can be a blocked PCV valve, so sometimes you've got to get your hands dirty and pull off the hoses for that. So it's not a conclusive test, but it is helpful. We'll give it a rev, see what it sounds like. That all sounds reasonable. I don't know what it sounds like on the video. All of the belts look okay. Common things on the RB series engines is to look for oil leaks. It's a little bit there. It's not an important gasket, but it just can be a little bit messy. Other things that I normally check when having a look in here is, of course, around the struts, tower tops, and around the inner guards for accident history. And likewise, check the chassis rails to make sure that there's no accident history. All of that gum looks okay. It helps if each car's sort of little foibles and things. I mean, usually R33s, or not usually, but often, they have a bit of rust around the strut towers. So that's always something to look out for. It's not too bad in this case. Other things I normally do, I mean, I'm doing this in a bit of a rush here, obviously, is give the car a bit of a rev and look for smoke. I'd normally do this when the engine's both warm and cold, just to see what you can learn from that. But I mean, obviously one would normally go over this in a bit more detail, but I'm just trying to do this in a bit of a hurry not to bore you. But aside from a bit of noise, which is now gone from the timing belt on this one, and the fact that the radiator is fairly dry, which it just suggests that the car hasn't been that loved by the previous owner maybe. It's not looking that great. I mean, it's if this car was cheap and if the customer was happy with these things, we'd maybe have a shot at it. But I'd consider these things to be a bit of a turn-off. So let's have a quick look-see at the body. The front bumper has a few scratches, and it's actually some pretty average paint around here. Oh, look at that. Isn't that nice? Always, of course, look down the panel so you can see for dents and wavy paint. Not that you're ever going to be able to see it in this, but Looks like this door's had a little bit of paint here, but I mean, you'd have to be a pro to pick it. I mean, the colour match looks pretty good, so you know, you'd let somebody know about it, but I wouldn't consider it to be an issue. Door mirror has a touch-up painted scratch, which was mentioned in the report. Always pays to get down low, yeah, like that, just to see what you can see. That's not factory paint. Oh, that's all been touched up there. I think giving this a grade 4 was pretty generous. There's condensation in the tail lights, which is pretty common with these. There's just a bit of gum back here, and when the gum pulls away, all the water rushes down in there, so that's not uncommon and not too difficult to fix. But yeah, that's grade 4. I think is being pretty kind to this one actually. Let's have a look underneath. This is by far the most fun part of the job. Especially, I don't know if you're going to be able to see anything under there. Where's my torch? Especially when it's raining and you're lying on the ground, lying in puddles. That's really the worst bit. That all looks reasonable. A little bit of rust in the chassis rail, but nothing too bad. No leaks from the diff housing there. R33s, usually it's around the back, around this back section where rust is the biggest problem, especially if it's a car from the snowy area. Kind of the snow gets all clumped up in here. Just having a look in here, it all looks reasonable. Check the rails for dents and scratches and anything else which might suggest accident history, or even just, you know, driving over a big rock or something. Of course, look for oil leaks. That all looks reasonable. And the front, this is the last one because I'm sure this is getting boring now. It looks okay. Also pays to check with the R33s this bush here, which tends to, you know, leak goop out of it. It's just a common problem with a lot of the mid-90s Nissans. They kept the same part forever and ever, even though that kept failing. That all looks okay. I mean, usually I'd go underneath and look at all corners, but that seems reasonable. Inside, a little bit of wear to the seats. Usually wear to the seats and wear to the steering wheel and the pedals and the gear knob is a fairly good indication of you know, if the mileage is genuine. This one has a bit of mileage. The K's are 98,000 Ks. I'd say it's a little on the high side for 98,000 Ks for an R33. Usually their steering wheels are not too bad, but it's not suspiciously bad. It's just kind of at the worst end of the scale. In here, always of course check the all of the electrics, power windows, see what the rev's do and if it makes any funny noises. Well, it hasn't like that at all. Man, I really could have picked a better example. Interesting. Oil pressures are responsive enough. At least an oil pressure senders are pretty average at the best of times. Aircon, see if that's cold, see if that's hot, all the usual checks like that. Oh, very nice. As you can see, a test drive isn't possible, but if you put it in you know, a highish gear, put your foot on the brake and on the accelerator at the same time and release the clutch, you can see it pretty much stall, so that indicates that the clutch is in fairly good condition. And the rest of the stuff in the interior is I guess you could say fairly fairly common stuff. It's just, you know, checking visually for things. Let's have a quick look in the boot, see what we can learn from there. Usually it's a little bit tricky here with not a lot of room, but you'd also have a look at the inner panel from underneath, just to see if there's any accident history. And likewise have a look under here. Well, there's some more water. Again, it's a common R33 problem. Basically the water just comes down here, and rather than going through the proper route, It just pulls in there, so it has a little bit of surface rust, but you know, the back panel looks original, or the gum looks original, so it doesn't look like it's had a rear accident. Other things you can do, of course, to check for the accident history, always look at these parts. That's always a dead giveaway, and that all looks fairly standard. So that's all looking okay. So I mean, you can kind of see the information you can get about a car. I mean, the most important thing you've learned about this one is, you know, don't always trust the auction sheet. I mean, they gave this a grade 4 for the body, which I think is a bit generous. The interior is a B, that's fair enough. It's pushing it maybe a little bit with that steering wheel, but I think that's okay. And I mean, the most important thing is, yeah, it sounds like it's going to need the tensioner and the timing belt replaced fairly soon. So, you know, if you're looking for something cheap or whatever, you know, it might be okay. But usually I'd sort of give something like this a miss, but that's up to the customer, of course. So that kind of gives you an idea of what sort of information you can get about a vehicle from auction.